Time now, though, to introduce our next speaker, somebody who has a vision for a world where nobody owns their own cars and our cities are much, much more sustainable than they are now. This is someone that's worked all over the world, South Africa, the US, all around Scandinavia, and still manages to find time to hang out on his bike and running as well. Please welcome Nikolaj Køster. He is from a car-sharing app, SPIRI, and also works with the partner company Driver, which has developed the software in order to make all of this happen. So please give him a warm welcome to Startup Day.
Nice. Thank you for the warm welcome. So just before I got here, or when I landed in Ireland, I was Googling how old the car actually was. I actually didn't really know that. I knew that it was more than 100 years old, but turns out the car is 132 years old. I'm pretty sure it won't make it to 150, at least not the cars we know it. So we'll talk a bit about that today, the time to retire the vehicle or the cars we know it. So I work for two companies, SPIRI and Driver, and what we do is that we develop the Lego bricks, if you will, that allows anyone to build powerful mobility solutions. So that simply means if you guys or somebody else wants to build your own Uber competitor, or if you want to launch, say, some kind of robotic, autonomous pizza delivery service, we have the building blocks for that, so the SDKs and the APIs. But let me just talk a bit about how we see the future. So what I just want to say, my original slide deck was way too big. It was, I think, almost 100 slides. I cut it down to about 50 slides, so I'll try not to rush it too much, but I think there's a lot to say about this space, and I think probably a bunch of you guys who sit in here have read sort of the numerous articles that have been written over the last couple of years of this imminent future when autonomous driving will really start freeing us from some of the problems that we see in the cities today. So we'll just try to look at that. So first of all, how we see the future of personal mobility. So a couple of this stuff is a given, but I just want to set a baseline. So first of all, the future of mobility, as we see it, is a service. That means that you do not own the transport. You don't own the vehicle. You access it as a service. The concept is actually pretty old. So taxis are a very old concept, and you don't obviously own a taxi. But the services of the future will just be more accessible. Point being that a lot of you guys actually don't use taxis today. They are very expensive. That's the primary reason. And the service is sort of debatable compared to how much you pay for it. The future is also electric, which is very good news, obviously, for the environment. We'll come back to that as well. We see it as shared. It's not going to be shared for everyone. I think for most of you guys in here, the future of transport is going to be shared. When we speak at other conferences where people are a bit more suited up than you guys or we are in here, if you have a lot of money, the future of your personal mobility is probably not going to be super shared. You probably will just pay a premium, and then you will still sit in the back of some really nice vehicle and you'll be on your own. And lastly, obviously, it's going to be self-driving. Exactly when, we don't really know, but pretty imminent. So this picture, I think, is quite fun. So I needed to show like a happy future. So I was Googling happy future smart cities and all kinds of variations of that. And I actually couldn't find a nice artwork. We didn't have the time to do one ourselves. So I stole this from Mercedes-Benz, Bosch. They announced a partnership 2 weeks ago about autonomous driving. And I just want to do a quick diss on them because I actually ended up... So I don't know if you can see what's wrong with this picture compared to how sort of a future of mobility is. The problem in this picture is that this is really a utopia picture. There's not enough people in this picture. This is not a city. There's way more people in the city. And most of the cars in the original pictures, or in the original picture version of this, are actually parked. So as you can probably see in the sort of the top background, you have 6 cars parked. And you actually have in the front, bottom right down there, you have 2 cars parked. It's not going to look like that. So the great news about how the cities are going to look is that all cars will actually be driving. They'll never be parked. They'll be occupied at all times. So we actually photoshopped a couple of extra cars on the streets moving into Mercedes pictures here. So I'll get a better one for next time. So what we'll quickly talk about today is the problem, then the solution to this, a bit of tech that we are building, and then a concept that we did as well. So the larger problems in the world is obviously the emissions. So that means that the vast majority of vehicles today, they still pollute. They're not electric. Then you have the utilization rate, which basically is that on average you have 1.5 people sitting inside a vehicle when they're driving. So you can see that in the streets of Stockholm. You have a lot of available seats in the vehicles, which means very low utilization rate. That's very stupid. The problem with that, obviously, is that it's very difficult to solve. So you need some technology and some services to do that. Parking is another problem. So there was a great study done in 2015 by OECD. What they did was that they tried to simulate an average European city. So what they did was that they said, how do people move in, this was Portugal, they modeled it on. So they said, how do people move in, Lisbon in Portugal. So they said, how do people move in Lisbon? How many people move into the city every day as they commute? How do they move around in the city during the daytime? And then they, most of the people commute back again. So they took those patterns and said, what if we removed all the owned vehicles and instead put in robot vehicles, taxi bots as they call them, or autonomous shared vehicles, or microbuses, if you will. And what they saw was that you can cover the same transport needs by removing 90% of these vehicles. So imagine a city like Stockholm with 90% of all the vehicles removed. What also happened was that since you're now left with only 10% of the vehicles, they are used at all times. So they're always driving around, being autonomous. They drop somebody off, and then they pick somebody new on. And then they go charge themselves, obviously, because they're autonomous, so you don't need to go anywhere to actually plug them in. What that means also is that you don't need parking spaces. So in a city like Lisbon, you could remove what equates to 210 football fields worth of parking spaces. So sort of quick back of napkin calculation, that's probably 2 or 3x that number up here in Stockholm. So that would be around 500 football fields worth of parking space that you guys could use for something else in this very beautiful city. So those could be parks or recreational areas, or you could build new, probably a good idea to build some new places to live in Stockholm so that the rent would go down. So one of the problems, obviously, that's going to be solved as well is the congestion. If you look at actually average speed in some of the big European cities, London, but also Stockholm, Copenhagen, where I'm from, it's around 20 kilometers an hour. The crazy thing about that is that when the car was invented, that was supposed to be the much faster horse. So that was, and the problem was, or the point is that a horse carriage actually goes faster than cars go in cities today. So they sit still. And then lastly, I think it's about 1.3 million people who are killed every single year from car accidents. And then you obviously have the vast effects on society of healthcare and so on. People don't necessarily have to die to obviously suffer from accidents. So the solution that's coming is the self-driving cars. And it's important to say that that the right solution is the shared and electric self-driving cars. So just to run through a couple of not quite there solutions. These are quite okay actually, and they're getting there. So some of you might know Overpool. This is Uber's version of multiple people sitting inside the vehicle. Lyft has it as well. So you just have a bunch of normal people sitting inside the car, and then they share it. Then you have a couple of electric services, Car2Go obviously. You have Drive Now as well, but they're not shared, so also that doesn't really work, and it's very expensive. So, but they're nice services. Again, the end goal, as we talked about before. And just to sum up what's actually going to happen. So first of all, I think it's important to say we'll die a lot less when we get these new services. I think that's pretty good news. Most of all car accidents are actually caused by humans smoking cigarettes, eating sandwiches, texting, being on the phone, etc. Robots don't do that. They don't care. So they'll just drive along. And then you'll have dirt cheap transport. So I think there's actually a big democratic sort of takeaway from this, meaning that children can suddenly drive. Blind people can drive. A 100-year-old man can now drive because he doesn't need to operate the steering wheel himself. So in that sense, mobility, personal mobility in cities will be democratic because everybody has access to it, and also because it's going to be so cheap. So what we'll see in the future is that we'll have, same way as you guys have a phone subscription, a Spotify subscription or something like that, you will probably be able to buy an extremely cheap flat rate mobility subscription, so you don't really need to care about how many trips you do. Right now, you are very conscious about, sometimes I go by foot, sometimes I go by bike, sometimes I take the bus, and occasionally, if it's really raining outside, I might take an Uber or a taxi. These are all pictures, by the way, of concept vehicles. I don't know if you know any of them, but this is Volkswagen's attempt at their self-driving cars. We'll get our cities back. As I mentioned before, 90% of all the cars will be done. I think this is actually a very good example of how some of these first vehicles will look like. This is an American-built microbus called the Ollie. What is interesting here is that we still have pretty slow electric vehicle adoption. It's difficult for the governments to persuade all of you guys to throw away your gasoline cars and go out and buy electric Teslas, because that's sort of the only thing you can buy right now that has long enough range. So, but the great thing is that when you don't buy vehicles, but you just have access to them as a service, you don't need to front any money. You don't need to take out any money off your pocket to buy expensive vehicles. So basically, autonomous driving and mobility as a service powers the adoption of electric vehicles. There's nobody in the world, not Toyota, not Volkswagen, BMW, or any of the bigger companies, or Uber or Apple, or anyone who wants to launch mobility as a service, nobody's thinking about launching a gasoline-powered shared service. It's all electric. So that's the good thing. This is one of the ones I want to go in. I think that's really nice. So just to quickly say, where do we fit in all of this? I don't want to talk too much about it, but just to let you know, we built, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we developed the building blocks for anyone to launch fleets of mobility service. So it basically means that we have the SDKs and the APIs so that you can launch the apps that go to the end users in the beginning before the autonomous vehicles goes into the cars of the drivers as well. And we can even connect the vehicles so you have cloud-connected vehicles. We're a fairly small team, about 30 people in 3 offices. I've been running for 6 years. Some nice guys. And the last thing I just want to show you is we did a bit of fun. We don't think that the big car manufacturers are actually being progressive enough in the vehicle design principles of the future of how these vehicles should look like. So this is actually how many taxis look like. If you take the ones here in Stockholm and through mainland Europe, these are Mercedes E-classes. Quite expensive vehicles. They weigh about 2 tons. They can go 250 kilometers an hour. You can have skis on the roof. You don't need that if you go in the city and you're just traveling 30, 40 kilometers an hour. So these are essentially jack of all trades and masters of none. So we thought, what if we just did an exercise and started from scratch? So that actually ended up with a prototype of a vehicle that looked not the prettiest vehicle in the world, but it showed some great design principles. This vehicle only weighs half of a normal Volkswagen Golf, but it goes about the same range as a Tesla, and it's half the price. A normal car has about 3,500 parts in it, so many bespoke parts, leather and wood and so on. This only has 700, so it's really easy to build and cheap to build. We did a concept on the back of it where we said, what if we actually try to launch a service today that is both shared and electric? It doesn't exist. So we call it SPIRI, and the idea is to get people to drive together. So the premise is you can drive for free as long as you take somebody with you if you're going in the same direction. So the software matches you with people going in the same direction. So you simply pick up a car that sits somewhere in Stockholm, enter the destination address, start driving, and then the software will match you with another person that goes in it. Why is this actually quite smart? Well, the vast cost of one of these expensive taxi trips here in Stockholm is the driver. He needs to get a salary. If there's no professional driver in the equation, nobody needs to get a salary. So we can actually bring the price down for a service like this to the level of autonomous driving. So it's basically autonomous driving prices now instead of in the future. So just to sum up, I think my 15 minutes are gone. The future is going to be as a service. You won't own vehicles. They'll be electric. They'll be shared, so you'll be sitting and making some new friends. Unless you have a lot of money, then you'll pay your way out of it. But 80% of the trips probably, and then it's going to be self-driving. And what's the outcome? It's going to be no accidents. At some point, it's going to be no accidents, more or less. No pollution, at least not local emissions. There's going to be no traffic as we know it. And it's going to be ultra-cheap mobility for everybody. So that's my message to you guys here today. The future, at least within mobility, is looking very, very bright. And it's very inevitable. It's going to come whether we build it or somebody else builds it. So thank you.
Thank you. We are actually slightly ahead of schedule, so I wondered if you want to take a couple of questions. We do have time, and we do have a microphone if anyone has got a burning question. So, yeah, you were first, I think. You can shout, but then I'm not sure if everyone can hear you. Do you want to run down and give this guy a bit of a hand? Might be the best question ever, who knows? No pressure now.
I don't suppose so, but in order for this idea to take off, what's the density of adoption we need so that I can get rid of my SL card, not necessarily get rid of it, but I can use this service more and more often? So is it like a step function? So until we reach there, or until we reach a critical momentum, it's not really usable, but suddenly it's super usable? Or is it like a ramp, which is a gradual transition?
It's a very good question. I think my quick answer is that it's you wake up one morning and it's there. Yeah, it's a step. I think you wake up a Monday morning and then outside your doorstep will be a really great self-driving electric service. It's basically because you don't need to wait for the whole of the population to shift their vehicles. If that's what we were waiting for somebody to sell their old PC and buy a new PC, go from a dumb phone to a smart iPhone or a smart Android phone, that would take a fairly long adoption time. That's not the case here. The case is that suddenly there will be a service launched in your city that's going to be so cheap that it's going to de-incentivize you of even walking to your car. So the next day you will put it on sale and your car will be worth nothing. So yeah, that's...
Great. Thank you very much. One more quick question, I think. Or maybe time for two, if we keep it answered snappy.
Thank you. I have a question regarding public transit and how this will impact public transit, since that's the main way of poor people today traveling in cities. Will harm them and make it more expensive to travel publicly because more people will travel by these electric vehicles.
Yeah, so some people, they're very sort of, what's it called, like deterministic in the way that they approach it. And they say sort of the new mobility services will kill, they'll kill public transport. You can just phrase it differently. The new mobility services will be the public transport. So what's going to happen is that they will merge together. You already see a lot of progressive cities and governments that are actually trying to take great interest in how can they bring these mobility services to their city and actually help them replace the existing public transport as they know it. So just an example, if you take any sort of Tuesday night at 2 a.m. here in Stockholm, some of the buses are driving around with only 2 passengers in them. That's a huge waste of money and real estate and all that stuff. So what they'll do instead is that they'll start adopting on-demand services instead. So buses are horrible, or public transport is horrible traditionally in the sense that it's fixed routes. They never go where you need to go, and they don't go from where you are. So you need to walk to them, and then they go, but they don't go to where you need to go. Then you need to walk there. And they also don't go at the time that you need to go. You need to wait for them, which is stupid. So, so public transport will basically be innovated with this. Yeah.
Super. One more very quick question. Yes?
Hi. So maybe you mentioned it in the beginning, but are you live anywhere now? And when is your plan to go live in Stockholm?
We don't have... so, yeah, the backstory of us is that we've actually built technology for taxi companies for the last 6 years. So it's sort of very proven technology that we built. And we're actually live in a couple of cities, both in Europe and also in the UK. But if you look at new mobility solutions, so self-driving, electric, and so on, that's still some time away. We do hope to launch one city. It's not going to be Stockholm, but one Scandinavian city in end of 2017. Not autonomous, but electric and shared.
Interesting. Okay, cool. We need to wrap it up. Thank you very much. I'm supposed to stay impartial, but I hate driving and I hate getting the subway. So this is super interesting to hear about. Thank you very much. Nikolaj Køster.
Thank you.